There's something about this time of year that makes me, and I'm sure you too, long for magic. Long for family, and long for calm, and long for space in life, and love, and hope. And if you're a kid, you've already started to long for Santa. Sometimes my heart can ache with a longing that I can't quite pinpoint. But I know that it's very, very present. And especially this time of year, it sort of settles up right alongside of hope. And I know that I'm wanting something, but I don't know exactly what it is. And I sort of feel a bit like that, like I could stand and stare out the window. Believe that out there, someplace is what I'm looking for. Someplace beyond this place I'm in is a place which feels a bit more like home. Which is why parts of Daniel make so much sense to me. I mean, parts don't. The parts of the story that totally bewilder me are when he gets to the end and there's the lions and he's content to be locked up with the beasts. I mean, this I can't relate to. The other day I was actually charged by what I believe was a 6-point buck, and there was nothing about me that was calm or content. I hid behind cars, and I didn't ask God to save me, nor did angels whisk down to my side. I mostly freaked out. And truth be told, I wasn't nearly in the same type of danger as Daniel. So the lion's part is really hard to relate to. However, the part of Daniel which resonates with me, and I believe will resonate with you, is this. Daniel went to his house, which had windows in its upper room open toward Jerusalem, and got down on his knees 3 times a day to pray to God. Now, I admit that I don't get down on my knees 3 times every day and pray. But the piece that could get lost here, the piece that explains why he gets down on his knees, why he continues to be faithful, and why he can turn his back on the lions, is because he knows where to turn. He knows where home is. Now, many, many Bible commentaries will tell you that Daniel faces Jerusalem because that is where he truly belongs. Because that is, after all, where God resides, in the holy city, in the temple, in Jerusalem. From a Jewish perspective, Daniel is not at home because he's not in Jerusalem. He is in Persia. He is in exile. For all intensive purposes, even though Daniel has a house, in many, many people's eyes, he is homeless. Many commentators would tell you that Daniel looks towards Jerusalem because he longs to be home. And I believe that's theologically accurate. However, I'd like to offer this alternative idea. And to really get this, I need you to first notice something with me. How many houses are in this story? There is Daniel's house. There is God's house, the temple. There is the king's house, the palace. There is the lion's house, the den. And there is also one other house that's not specifically mentioned, but is the underlying current to God's promise to the world. There is the house of Israel. Quite a few houses. And how many homes? Or maybe the better question is, how many people are at home in the houses? Is Daniel only at home in his house? Because he seems pretty at home in the king's palace. He's very high up, in charge of people who, according to law, get to make their home Daniel is oddly at home in Persia. And then there's even the more bewildering fact that he is at home in the lion's den. He is apparently fine all night long. And the poor king, sleeping in his own palace, is not at home. Sleep totally eludes him. The king's own subjects are able to twist his arm to do their bidding. Daniel may be the one who is abandoned and trapped, and he probably should be the one who feels lost, but in actuality, the king is the one who is trapped and abandoned. Daniel's actions are not indicative of a homeless man, not indicative of someone who longs for a home. See, I remember what it feels like to be displaced without a sense of home. I have a friend who's in this process of moving, of figuring out how home looks in a new and different place. And it is a very painful process. Most of the time, when you are longing for a home, you don't know which way is up. You don't know which direction to face. Daniel knows which direction to face. And while commentators say Jerusalem, I say it's not the whole story. Because if someone had said to me, so here's the deal. Your people will lose their homes and come under the rule of Babylon. And then they'll come under the rule of Persia. And then some of the people will get to go back home, but you will not. You'll stay behind, and a bunch of people will conspire against you, and you will be persecuted for your faith, and then you'll get thrown into a den full of lions, and you will be haunted by visions. I'm thinking if someone had said this to me, I'd probably say, you know, I'm done. This is more than I can handle. But Daniel turns his back on the lions and faces God. Daniel is able to live what Advent is all about. We typically say that Advent is a time of preparation, typically understood as preparation for Jesus' birth, and I don't dispute that. This is the beginning of the new year in the church, so a fuller interpretation of Advent may be that this is a time during which we learn to arrive at new places, trusting that endings always give way to new beginnings. This is how it is to birth something. It's probably true that if we could see all the steps in the journey that lie before us, we would never take the first step. Advent is a time when we learn to take the first step, so that then we can take the next step. Trusting that where our foot falls next is where home is, at least for that moment. That all that has gone on before has prepared us for this moment. And in this moment, God is preparing us for the next. And Daniel knows this, that home is found in the step that lies before us, not in some far-off place or distant time, and not in what used to be. Daniel doesn't see himself as homeless or as an exile. He sees himself as a nomad. Daniel's home is made wherever he is. And this simultaneously scares the hell out of me and gives me an immense amount of hope. Because I like to think of homes as places of refuge and safety. But here the homes are totally unpredictable and surprising, and even unsafe. Homes can be made in domesticated and in undomesticated. Daniel is nomadic, carrying all he needs, carrying hope with him so that he can make himself at home wherever he is. But Daniel can only see himself as a nomad and not as an exile for one reason. Because God is a nomad, moving from place to place, homeless. And God is not homeless in the sense of not being able to find a home. God's homeless in the sense of not being bound to one place. God makes his home just as easily in Persia as in Jerusalem. Just as easily in a tent as in a temple. Just as easily in a den full of lions as in angels' songs. And eventually, God makes his home easily within the womb of a woman and in a manger. See, Daniel, he worships a God who is different. We worship a God who is different. A God who knows how to birth newness. A God who moves. A God who lives and breathes. Daniel does indeed know which way to face. Daniel faces where his home does lie. Daniel faces now, trusting that God has already made his home in the place where he is. Which is hard, right? Hard when the place where we are currently living out the story of our life doesn't feel like home, and it doesn't feel content, doesn't even feel like what we think God would want for us. But you know what our story doesn't tell us? It doesn't tell us what God said to Daniel as he spent the night with the angels, or with the lions. And I, for one, know that God must have said something, because Daniel is just a guy. And there weren't any cars in that den to hide behind. For Daniel, there was no escaping. Maybe God said something like this to Daniel through those angels' lips. Maybe God is saying something like this to you. I know that it's difficult to see it from here. And I know that the far point on the horizon, enveloped in the sunrise, seems better. I know that you've begun to wonder how far you can really walk, and that your rations don't seem enough. The place where you are right now, at this very moment, it may not seem like everything you've longed for. Look up, and look down, and look to the left and to the right. Here in this place, you will find everything you need, because I'm right here, because I've made my home in you, and this is home for now.